The day I went to a motel with my brother-in-law, and by coincidence, my sister was in the room next door with my husband. But unlike my sister, I wasn't there to do anything wrong. On the day of my sister's one-year dating anniversary, my brother-in-law approached me asking for help to prepare a romantic surprise. He wanted to propose to her. He told me he wanted something more intimate and special and was thinking of renting a hotel room, decorating it with gifts, balloons, and flowers, and spending the night there with her. He asked if I could help with the decoration, and I agreed. He said he would try to reserve the room for the entire day, so we would have enough time to prepare everything before nightfall. I told my husband about the plans, mentioned the day, time, and place, and he didn't see any problem with it. In fact, he fully supported me. However, on the agreed day, the hotel called my brother-in-law to let him know they couldn't keep the reservation for the whole day, not even by paying extra. It was last minute. We started looking for another hotel, but since it was a holiday, everything was full. There were no rooms available anywhere. It was then when I suggested, why don't you try a motel? A more elegant, well-decorated one. In the end, it's all the same. He agreed and managed to book a room in a nice, well-kept motel. We agreed to go during the day to decorate it, and at night he would return with my sister for the surprise. But in the rush, I forgot to tell my husband that the location had changed. It would no longer be a hotel, but a motel. We arrived and started decorating. He was inflating balloons on one side, me on the other, until suddenly we heard screams coming from the next room. They were a woman's screams, but not just any screams. The voice sounded incredibly similar to my sister's. At that moment, I was confused but tried to ignore it. I thought, impossible, it can't be. But my brother-in-law heard her too. He stopped, looked at me confused, and said, "Wow, that voice sounds a lot like your sister's." And then the woman screamed again. In that instant, I knew. It was my sister. My heart raced, but not for myself, but for him. I thought about how devastating it would be for him. He was such a good man. Still, I remained silent until he looked at me with eyes full of tears and said, "I'm sure it's her." Seeing his suffering broke my heart. And it was then that, although I wished with all my being that it was just a misunderstanding, I decided to knock on the door of the room next door. Deep down, I still hoped I was wrong. And then, translation to English. I knocked on the door hard, my heart racing, my hand trembling. With each passing second, the anguish became almost unbearable. There was no answer. I knocked again, even harder. I could hear movements from the other side. Hurried footsteps, muffled voices, furniture being dragged. They were trying to buy time. My brother-in-law, standing beside me, had teary eyes and a tense jaw. I could feel his desperation as much as my own. It wasn't just fear of what we were about to find. It was the kind of pain one feels when beginning to understand that life is going to be divided in two. The before and after of that door. Finally, after an eternity, the doorknob turned. The door opened with a slow creak, as if even the environment itself was hesitant to reveal the rottenness it was hiding. There she was, my sister, disheveled, with a reddened face, wearing barely a loose blouse that, from afar, didn't seem to be hers. She blinked, irritated by the brightness of the hallway, and upon seeing us, the irritation turned into shock. But it lasted only a second. "What are you doing here?" she asked, with a harsh voice, trying to sound authoritative, as if we were invading her privacy. Before I could say anything, I saw over her shoulder, and what I saw made my stomach turn. There inside, still adjusting his pants, was my husband. My husband. He froze when our eyes met, like an animal caught in a trap. The shame stamped on his face, trembling hands trying to hide what could no longer be hidden. My brother-in-law let out a choked sound, as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. He took a step back, as if that were enough to escape the scene, the reality, the crushing pain that surrounded us. "It's not what it looks like," my sister suddenly shouted, raising her hands, her voice sharp and desperate. I just came to talk to him. It's a coincidence. We met here without meaning to. Talk. Without meaning to. Without clothes. In a motel. Her cynicism hit me like a slap in the face. But at that moment, what hurt me the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was looking at my brother-in-law, seeing the good man who blindly trusted her crumbling right in front of me, seeing how he still tried for a second to believe that absurd lie, as if he desperately wanted everything to have a plausible explanation. But it didn't. He shook his head, tears descending his face without him even trying to stop them. I wanted to hug him, protect him, but my own legs could barely hold me up. Rage boiled inside me, mixed with a deep sadness. But my pain seemed small compared to his. My sister, realizing that the excuses weren't working, changed tactics. She played the victim. She started crying, saying it was his fault, my brother-in-law's, that he was cold, distant, that she was needy and vulnerable. My husband didn't say anything. He just stood there, quiet, head down, like a coward who doesn't even have the decency to face the consequences. I felt like screaming, like destroying everything around me, but I remained motionless, as if trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I watched my brother-in-law walk away, staggering down the hallway, as if each step physically hurt. And I followed him. Because at that moment, I knew he needed me more than I needed those pathetic explanations. I left my sister crying, left my ashamed husband, and I vowed to myself that would be the last time they would see me bow my head. They had betrayed me, but the wound they left in him, that I would never forgive. We left the hallway of that motel as if fleeing from an explosion. The world seemed to be in slow motion. I could hear my own heart beating loudly in my ears, my legs weak, my chest crushed. My brother-in-law's face looked like a portrait of devastation. He wasn't looking at anything, wasn't speaking, just walking in a straight line, like a ghost. When we reached the parking lot, he collapsed. He leaned on the hood of his car and began to cry. It wasn't a contained or embarrassed cry. It was a cry of losing breath, of doubling the body in pain, of sobbing as if the soul was tearing inside. I had never seen a man cry like that. Never. I wanted to cry too, wanted to scream until I lost my voice. But faced with his suffering, I held back, because somehow that hurt me more than the betrayal I had suffered myself. So I approached slowly, without saying anything, just stood there, beside him, silent, like someone trying to offer an anchor for someone to hold on to in the midst of the storm. It took him time to be able to breathe normally. When he finally raised his face, his eyes red and swollen, he looked at me as if he were asking for help without using words. "Come with me," I whispered. My voice came out faltering, trembling, but he understood. I got into my car and he, without arguing, followed me. I couldn't go home. I couldn't face my husband, ex-husband. I was already starting to correct it mentally and pretend that everything was normal. I didn't know where to begin, what to say, what to do. I just knew I didn't want to leave him alone. When we arrived at my house, a house that until that morning had seemed so secure, so full of plans and dreams, the emptiness hit me like a sledgehammer. Everything there carried his scent. The photos on the shelf, the coats hanging up, the coffee mug in the sink. Everything was now dirty, corrupted. My brother-in-law entered hesitantly, as if he were invading. I just locked the door and left the keys on the first surface I found. There were no more rules, no more protocol for that situation. There were just the two of us, two castaways trying to grab onto any piece of wood in the rough sea. We sat on the sofa, without the courage to look at each other. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I felt the tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had to be strong. For him. For myself. It was he who broke the silence first, his voice hoarse from crying so much. "What are we going to do?" The question hung in the air, floating between us like a sentence. I closed my eyes for an instant, trying to find an answer. But the truth was that I didn't know either. "Nothing. Not yet," I replied softly. "We need to think. We need to understand what happened. Process it." He nodded slowly, rubbing his face with his hands. He looked exhausted, destroyed. "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear her voice. Not now," he murmured. "Neither do I confessed. "Let's keep this just between us for now. Not talk to anyone, at least until we can breathe again." He nodded in silence. It wasn't a coward's pact. It was the last attempt to preserve what was left of our dignity before facing the world out there. But the suffering was unbearable. Every second inside that house was like walking barefoot on broken glass. Every memory hurt me in a new way. And worse, it wasn't just my pain I was carrying. It was his pain too. I looked at him sitting there, with trembling hands and a lost gaze, and something inside me broke. They destroyed us. They laughed at our trust, spat on our loyalty. And even so, at that moment, all I wanted was to protect that good man from the cruelty we had just witnessed. Because if the world had already turned its back on us, at least we still had each other. For several days, the house remained submerged in a heavy silence. My brother-in-law practically moved into the guest room. Neither of us had the strength to talk about what happened. The only silent agreement was to try somehow to survive the pain, each in their own way. But, as in every tragedy, the calm wouldn't last long. On a suffocating afternoon, while I was trying to distract myself by washing dishes I no longer even felt like using, I heard loud knocks on the door. I felt my stomach turn immediately. Something told me nothing good would come from there. I opened the door and there they were. My sister and my, God, how hard it still was to call him that, husband, hand in hand as if they were victims of a great injustice. The cynicism stamped on their faces made me nauseous. "Can we talk?" asked my sister with a sweet voice that I knew was pure fakery. I didn't answer. I just moved aside and let them in. My brother-in-law, who was in the living room, immediately stood up, tense. They sat down as if they owned the place. My husband, ex-husband, looked at me with a look of disapproval, as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. Then my sister began. "Look, we know what you tried to do," she said, crossing her arms. "You set up that whole scene to separate us. You manipulated everything." I had to contain myself from laughing nervously. It was surreal. It was sick. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Of course," she continued, puffing out her chest as if she were about to present the thesis of the century. "You've always been envious of me. You've always wanted to destroy my happiness. It's not a coincidence that you took my boyfriend to a motel, and then made that whole scene." "Enough." My brother-in-law stood up, red with rage. "It was you who was there betraying. I saw. I heard. How dare you?" She turned to him with an icy, venomous look. "Oh, sure. Now you're innocent, aren't you? I bet you don't even know what you saw. I bet she poisoned you against me." My husband just lowered his head, shrinking. He didn't even have the dignity to deny, to admit. Nothing. Coward to the end. Her words began to spread like poison. In less than a day, the entire family found out. But, of course, the version they heard was hers. I was accused of having set a trap to separate them, of being envious, resentful, cruel. "How did you have the courage to destroy your sister's happiness?" they asked me. My mother called me crying, saying she was disappointed in me. My father, so rigid, sent me a cold message saying he didn't want to get more involved in my dramas. My uncles, my cousins, all, without exception, turned their backs on me. They chose to believe her story. I was humiliated, trampled, painted as a villain from a cheap soap opera. I, who had spent my life trying to keep that family together, trying to be good, correct, loyal. And now I was the traitor. I felt like screaming to the world that it was all a lie, that I was the victim, that they were the traitors. But no one wanted to listen, because it was easier to hate me than to face the ugly, dirty truth that my sister and my ex-husband represented. I was left alone, except for my brother-in-law. He was the only one who remained, the only one who saw the truth. And that, at that moment, was the only thing that prevented me from crumbling completely. After days of being treated like the worst person in the world, I had already accepted that there was nothing more I could do. People believe what they want to believe, and at that moment it seemed more convenient for everyone that I be the villain. My brother-in-law, however, didn't give up. I noticed the way he observed me in silence, as if he carried within himself a fury that had not yet exploded. It was he who proposed the meeting. I confess I hesitated. I didn't want to humiliate myself more in front of those people. I didn't want to sit in front of people who pointed fingers at me with looks of contempt. But for him, I accepted. Maybe it was our last attempt to do justice. That afternoon, sitting in our mother's house, were everyone. My parents, my uncles, cousins, even some close family friends, and of course, my sister and my ex-husband, together, as if they were victims of an absurd conspiracy. I sat in a corner without saying a word. My presence was ignored, as if I were a burden they were forced to bear. My eyes were dry. I had no more tears to offer. It was then that my brother-in-law stood up, without beating around the bush, without stammering. "I brought evidence," he said, and the room plunged into a tense silence. He placed his cell phone on the table, connected it to the TV, and began to show everything. The photos, the messages, the motel reservations, the exchange of conversations between my sister and my husband, arranging meetings, exchanging disgusting declarations of love and desire, while behind our backs, they destroyed us. With each new image that appeared on the screen, I saw the faces in the room change. First disbelief, then shock, and finally, shame. My mother brought her hand to her mouth, unable to hide the horror. My father, always so tough, flushed with anger and lowered his head. My brother-in-law didn't stop. He continued reading, word for word, mercilessly exposing the filth they tried to hide. My sister tried to defend herself. She tried to shout, make a scene, say it was all staged, that everything was manipulated. But the amount of evidence was so overwhelming that not even she could keep the lie standing. My ex-husband remained mute, shrinking on the sofa like the pathetic coward he always was. When the presentation ended, the silence was absolute. All eyes turned to me, but this time filled with shame and regret. It was my opportunity to speak, to stand up, shout, throw in all their faces how much they hurt me without even listening to me. But I said nothing. I got up slowly, took my purse, and looked at each one of them, one by one. "Now you know," I murmured. And honestly, it no longer makes any difference. I saw tears running down some faces. I saw desperate attempts to approach, to apologize, to mend what was unmendable. But I was already tired. Tired of begging for love, understanding, respect. Without looking back, I walked out the door. I left my family behind. I left the traitors behind. I left the pain behind. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something new inside me. Freedom. They lost me. And I finally found myself. The months that followed were difficult. Very difficult. At first, everything seemed like a void. I would wake up and wonder who I was, what was left of me after they had stolen everything. My marriage, my family, my reputation. But little by little, the pain transformed into something different. Something stronger. Something that made me get out of bed every day, even when I still felt like disappearing from the world. My brother-in-law, or better, my friend, because that's what he was now, was by my side the whole time. Not as a shadow of pain, but as living proof that it was possible to survive what they did to us. We saw each other almost every day. At first, it was strange, silent. Like two soldiers who survived the same battlefield, trying to understand how to move forward. But, with time, we created a friendship that I never imagined could exist. It was a relationship based on the deepest respect, on shared suffering, on the silent understanding of someone who knows, without needing to say it, what the other carries inside. There was no romance, there were no stolen kisses or empty promises. It was much more beautiful than that. It was real. We took small trips, we started new hobbies, we remodeled parts of the house, we laughed, we cried, we learned to live again. And each step, each new breath, was a small victory. Meanwhile, my sister and my ex-husband, they were sinking. Rejected by the family, isolated from friends, viewed as the shame of all who ever knew them. It wasn't long before they began trying to approach again. Messages, calls, dramatic letters, requests for forgiveness adorned with pathetic justifications, attempts to rewrite history as if they were victims of their own mistake. My friend and I, because that's truly what he was now, received the first contacts with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. But it was on a Sunday afternoon when the final scene occurred. They appeared in person, standing at my door, thin, dejected, with pleading looks. "We made a mistake, we know," said my sister, her voice breaking. "But we're family." I looked at them both, feeling nothing but cold contempt. "Family," I repeated, letting out a dry laugh. "You lost that right when you decided to stab those who trusted you most. Now you can go back to the hole you crawled out of." My friend, by my side, crossed his arms and said firmly, "You're not welcome here. Never again." I closed the door in their faces. Without shouting, without crying, without trembling, I just closed it. And when I heard the sound of the doorknob fitting into place, it was as if I had also closed a painful part of my life. I looked at him. He looked at me, and we smiled. It was a smile of someone who knows they've lost a lot, but at the same time gained something invaluable. Freedom. Freedom to let go of those who don't deserve our love. Freedom to rebuild life without bowing to those who hurt us. Freedom to be happy, without fear, without guilt. Today I know, sometimes the worst betrayals don't destroy us. They free us. Time passed. When I say this, it's not just the calendar that turned pages. It's as if the internal scars were also, little by little, closing. They still hurt sometimes, on cloudy days of the soul. But, in general, life was starting to have color again. My friend, because he was definitely the best friend I could have now, blossomed before my eyes. It was beautiful to see. From a broken man, he became someone stronger, lighter, and of course, eventually, he met someone. I still remember the day he showed up at my house, all nervous, playing with his car keys as if he were 15 again. "I wanted to introduce you to someone," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. I laughed, crossing my arms. "Ah, I see," I teased, amused. "You're in love, huh?" He turned as red as a ripe tomato, and that only made me laugh more. "It's not that. I mean, it's serious. I want you to meet her. I want to know what you think." And suddenly, I felt an enormous responsibility. He trusted me so much that he needed my approval, my opinion. It was beautiful. It was rare. We agreed to go out to dinner. A simple place without pomp, the way we always liked. When she arrived, I understood everything. She was sweet, genuine, the kind of person who didn't need to say much to convey peace. We talked for hours. I laughed, had fun, and in the end gave my verdict with the most serious air I could muster. "Well, I approve, but only because she didn't run away after seeing your weird laugh." He laughed so loudly that he made the whole restaurant look at our table. I laughed along with him. He was happy, and that was what mattered most to me. I, on the other hand, took a different path. After everything I had experienced, I realized that I didn't want, nor did I need, a relationship to feel complete. My focus turned to work. I immersed myself in projects, courses, new challenges. I rediscovered myself as capable, strong, full of ambitions that before I believed I had to postpone to fit into the mold of the perfect wife. No. Now I was my own priority. I became my own best company. Sometimes on Friday nights, my friend and I still met to chat, remember our falls, and mainly celebrate how we managed to get up. He with a new love, me with a new life. And every time we said goodbye, I returned home with the absolute certainty that some losses, as painful as they may be, lead us exactly to where we should be. Because sometimes, to find true happiness, we first need to lose everything that was making us small. Life has its own ways of showing that everything happens at the right time. I was fine. Truly fine. Not that forced happiness that one pretends for the world, but a quiet peace that I carried with me, even on the busiest days. It was on a sunny afternoon, while organizing my papers in the office, that he appeared. With that silly smile that I knew so well by now, he entered without even knocking, as he always did, and threw himself on the sofa, nervous and radiant at the same time. "I have something to tell you," he announced. "If it's to say you learned how to cook." "I'm already telling you I don't believe you," I replied, laughing. He rolled his eyes, but kept the smile. "I'm going to be a father." For a second, the world stopped. I felt my eyes fill with tears, but this time of genuine happiness. He, who one day I thought had lost everything, was now beginning a new story. I jumped up and hugged him so tightly that he complained, laughing. "Congratulations, my friend," I whispered. "And there's more," he said, releasing me slowly, his eyes shining with emotion. I want you to be the godmother." My heart raced. I didn't think twice. "Of course I accept," I answered, laughing and already imagining myself with tears at the baptism. Everything was in order. Everything had finally found its place. Everything, except her. When my sister found out, of course, it was a scandal. She sent furious, indignant messages as if the world owed her something. "It's absurd that I'm not invited," she shouted in one of the voice messages. So hysterical that she sounded like a child throwing a tantrum. I just laughed. I responded calmly, cold and precise. "The place for snakes is in the middle of the brush, and you are exactly where you should be." I didn't respond to anything else after that. I blocked, deleted, moved on. While I was building a life full of love, respect, and truth, she was sinking deeper and deeper into failed relationships, repeating the same pattern of betrayal, lies, and self-sabotage that she herself had chosen. It was sad, but it was her choice. And I had already learned that I couldn't, nor did I want to, save someone who doesn't want to be saved. My friend, now about to be a father, was flourishing. His new wife's family welcomed him with open arms, with respect, affection, and everything he always deserved, but never had in our old family. I, for my part, remained happy. I didn't need labels, alliances, promises of eternal love. My happiness was real because it came from myself. And in that new life we built together, he with his family, I with my dreams and achievements, We understood that sometimes the true victory is simply being happy while others sink in their own choices, without hate, without resentment, simply free.